So one of the things that the SharePoint 2013 team did with this latest version is not only did they beef up all the web services for SharePoint and add coverage for almost every single piece of functionality in SharePoint, and updated all the client libraries to wrap all those web services, but also created a new set of client libraries for Windows Phone. So there's actually a SharePoint SDK for Windows Phone 8, and there's also one for Windows Phone 7. And so what that does when you install that is it installs the SharePoint client libraries and the project templates for Windows Phone 8. In Visual Studio 2012, you'll see a SharePoint 2013 application template for Windows Phone. And then there's also, this isn't just for Windows Phone, it's just for all mobile applications. SharePoint has a new SP field, geolocation field, and so there's some pretty interesting things you can do with that, with integrating with Bing Maps, and it allows you to you can create some location-aware apps. And one thing that's really important is that the Windows Phone SDK has authentication helper classes. So in SharePoint 2013, if you're going against an on-premises environment, most of the time you're going to go against, typically it's going to be Windows authentication. So it has support for that, but then it also has support if you're using SharePoint Online. So there's a different set of authentication classes that you can use for SharePoint Online. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to build a Windows Phone 8 SharePoint list application, and then we're going to take a look at the internals of that application. Okay, right now I'm on a Windows 8 machine. In order to develop Windows Phone applications, at least for Windows Phone 8, you need to be on a Windows 8 desktop. So I'm on a Windows 8 machine, and I've installed Visual Studio and the Windows Phone SDK, and then also the SharePoint 2013, or the SharePoint SDK for Windows Phone 8. So with that being said, I'm going to create a new project. And notice I have, there's two templates for SharePoint on Windows Phone. First of all, let me back up a little bit. So under C#, I go to Windows Phone, and at the very bottom is it's a Windows Phone empty SharePoint application, and then this one is a little bit more interesting. This is the Windows Phone SharePoint list application. So I'm going to go ahead and create this, and it's got a nice little wizard here that's going to ask us how to connect to the site. So I'm going to put the URL in there, and I'm going to find, it's going to do a search. It's calling web services right now in SharePoint to figure out, okay, I typed in the wrong name. So what it's doing, it's calling the web services on SharePoint to figure out what lists are there. So I'm going to go ahead and pick the vendors list. That's a list that we created. And now the next question is, what view do you want? So it only has one view, so I'll choose all items view. And I'm going to go ahead and do the full create, read, update, delete functionality. So we want the title, that's by default, and then I'd also like the full name and the primary phone to show up for the fields. And the order, this is fine. So when I click finish, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. So it's not just building just a front-end form. It's actually using best practices for Windows Phone development, actually for XAML development. So this is XAML right here. This is the same thing that you would see in Silverlight or Windows Presentation Foundation, and it's using the model view model pattern, which is a great way to separate all your layers of your application and makes it a lot easier to test your application. So you can see here, here's the default view. I'm going to go ahead and close this and then open up Solution Explorer. And we have our views here. So here's a view for each one of our the choices that we made here, how we want to edit. Now this is the one that is going to be the default view. It's the list.xaml. It's going to show you all of the items in the list. So let me close this. And so you can see it's using a pivot control. Pivot control allows us to show more with less real estate. So we can have a list and then we can swipe and go to something else. In this case, we just have, you can see right here, it's just a list box, and the list box is going to show, there's a data template for the list box that's going to arrange the title, the full name, and the phone number. So let's go down to the view models. So this view model is being bound to that form. So actually, let me go back to that form again. If I come here, I just want to look at the XAML here because I want to show the data binding. So see if we don't have data context set here. Typically what happens is the view model is going to be set, so the data context of this, we'll just call it a form, or this page, the data context of this phone application page is going to be set to the view model. I don't see it being set declaratively here, so it's probably being set through code. So the data context is to the view model, and the view model is being so this list box has an item source and it's binding to view 1. And then view 1 has properties of title, full name, primary number. So that's how the binding is being done there. So if we look in okay, let's go to list view model base. And so you can see here some properties on the view model base. There's the view data dictionary, and then there's an indexer for the view name, and then this event handler just lets the view know that the data has been loaded. So we'll go to view model base. The view model base is basically just implementing the iNotify property changed. So this handles when a property changes, it's going to fire off the property changed event right here. And when you're in XAML applications that are bound to a data context, that are, let's say they're bound to a property, and then you fire off this event saying this property changed. So if we go to the definition, property changed events, arguments, the property name, let's say the full name property name changed, well, that lets the UI know that it needs to rebind to that. So let's go back. Solution Explorer. So these are the view models. Sample data is for design time, so you can populate your views without being connected to the data source. And then we have a list data provider. So this is actually going out, and this is where it's actually using the client object model. So you can see right here, Microsoft.SharePoint.client. It's being referenced, and we have our client context right here. So this list data provider is basically responsible for initializing the client context. Here's a site URL that we put in at the beginning of the wizard, and it stores that inside the project. And then here's a load item method. It's going to have a callback when it's finished. Same thing with load data. It takes the view name, and then it's going to have a callback. So when it finishes, it calls back. The callback will update the UI. Here's load data from server. So you can see the call being made here. So the context is, first of all, we were building a camel query. We're calling get by title, then we're calling get items using the camel query. And you can see here, we're only including the field values that we've specified. And then here's the XML for the view that was retrieved from SharePoint during the wizard when we were creating the app. And then here's the view fields. So we care about the title, full name, primary number. And this is just a helper method to, given a view name, get the camel query from it. So let's go ahead and run this and see what it looks like. So while this is loading up, one of the things that you have to do if you're connecting on premises and you are using Windows authentication, you either need to enable forms-based authentication or basic authentication. So I went and changed on the through central administration. I added support for basic authentication, basically just checking a checkbox. So you'll get an error, or not get an error, you'll saying it's an insecure channel because we're not using SSL, but that's just, we're in a development environment. Typically, if you're going to be using that, you would just, as long as you're using SSL, then it's not a concern. So when you're in Windows Phone apps and you're using the emulator, if you want to type and use your keyboard, you just hit the pause button on your keyboard, and then it allows you to use your keyboard instead of having to type the numbers on the Windows Phone screen, or touch the numbers, I should say. So we'll say we want to remember me, remember my password, and we'll log on. And you can see it retrieved all the items in the vendors list. So it made that call, calling the client object model. The client object model made the web service call for us, returned the results back, and now we're data bound. This is the list box that we were looking at on the in the list.xaml file. And so you can see this, the way it's organized here. This is just using a data template to organize things in a horizontal. These text blocks are just lined up, I'm sorry, not horizontal, but vertically. It's oriented vertically. And so I can actually pick one of these, and that's going to make me navigate to a different page where I can view the item. And so now if I want to, I could either delete it, cancel, or edit the item. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this item. We'll change the phone number. So this is for Acme. I'm going to change the phone number to 6545. And if I go to we can go to the SharePoint server, we can verify that. And let's go to the vendors list. You can already see it's been modified 1 minute ago. And so here it is right here, 6545. So our change did take effect. So let's do, let's add a new item. We'll save that. And let's refresh this page. And sure enough, here's our new item.